This is a special edition of a Radical Recovery Summit. It's special in a couple of ways. One is usually these interviews are moderated by Lynn Fraser, who does a great job. But this particular interview, Dan and I wanted to jump at the chance to talk to our guest today. We're both fans of her work, much deep respect for her work and her contribution to this whole conversation that we've been having for a number of years around authentic healing and awakening. So let me introduce to you, everybody. This is Dr. Nicole LePera, otherwise known as the Holistic Psychologist. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Nicole works great. I am so honored, Scott and Dan, to be here with you. I've been such a huge admirer of your work in particular and what you're doing in the recovery space. So I am honored, and I have been super anxiously awaiting the opportunity to have this conversation with you. So thank you for having me.
And we have too. Dr. Nicole LePera was trained in clinical psychology at Cornell University and the New School for Social Research, and also studied at the Philadelphia School of Psychoanalysis. As a clinical psychologist in private practice, Dr. Nicole found herself frustrated by the limitations of traditional psychotherapy, wanting more for her patients and for herself. She began a journey to create a unified philosophy of mental, physical, and spiritual health that equips people with the tools to heal themselves. Offering a true paradigm shift in mental well-being, Dr. Nicole's teachings empower the individual to break free from inherent beliefs and uncover their authentic selves. She is the New York Times bestselling author of How to Do the Work and is the creator of #Self-Healers Movement, an international community of people joining together to take healing into their own hands, seeing the limitations in the spiritual field and the mental health field. And you've really been a pioneer in this area. So let me just start with, I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but we're kind of interested in some of the events that shaped you from your childhood, because we feel like there's something there that you want to tell people, and that will help people understand maybe more of where your message comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in many ways, my journey does begin as that childlike self. And very much in my childhood, I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of active stress in the home. I was living in Philadelphia, so city life, a lot of stressors outside of the home. I had a lot of chronic illness inside of the home, and really being largely under supported, but always really curious. So I felt a lot of anxiety around just general life stress, not having the adequate support to cope with it. And I always was really, really fascinated with the mind, with people, with what made them tick, for lack of a better word. So before very long, and really being really performance driven in my family, that was one of the ways I was able to get the attention, the connection that was available with so much else happening. For me, it was really around my mom. When I was performing, when I was achieving academically, athletically, I was able to feel as connected to her as I had ever felt. So before long, in search of achievement, in honoring the curiosity of the human mind, you very much would have heard me. And I think this is the case for a lot of us who end up in the psychology field, seeking to help ourselves, having lived the experience of having anxiety myself and very much OCD-like tendencies, not really feeling like I had the support. So went into the field, went through a whole significant amount of training, much of which you read about in my bio, and landed myself back in Philadelphia, my hometown, to open up the private practice I imagined I had wanted for myself for as long as I can remember. And a couple years into that practice, and I think what's really significant and why I'm so attached and drawn and supportive of the work that both the two of you do out in the world, is so much of my training really was in the recovery field. I was very grateful that one of the things that the New School did offer was a concentration in substance abuse treatment, was the name of the concentration at that time. So that afforded me, which the reality I think in the field is there's so much overlap with people struggling in recovery with active addictions and also struggling with mental health diagnoses. So why all training programs don't have both of that in it is beyond me. But for me, again, being immersed in the field, now opening up my private practice, something was really, really clear to me several years in, which is the universal experience that all of my clients were having and that I had become aware I was having myself at this point, which was feeling universally stuck, having so much awareness, insight, tools, and the people that were privileged enough to be in my office, even resources available and treatment centers. I've been inpatient, outpatient in terms of the recovery center, yet so few people are actually able to create and maintain changes. So for me, feeling very disempowered, struggling in my own life, feeling very disconnected from this whole world I created that I thought was going to make me feel so fulfilled around me, and feeling pretty low is one of the best ways to describe it. I really began a journey, first of exploration, trying to figure out what the heck was happening. Why was I struggling? Why wasn't I a very successful clinician in the room? And the gift of that low, as I think is the case for many of us, for me was so much discovery in terms of information. It allowed me to begin to explore root causes and what really is going on and why we are really struggling in the way that we are. So for me, really, as is the case for most of us, began to apply the tools in my own life, and then obviously created the Instagram account and saw very quickly how universally resonating that experience of stuck was and how important these conversations needed to be had. So I began to have them.
You're very articulate in the way that you say things. I think that's why people resonate with it. You just have a way of saying things. It cuts right through the BS to the point, you know? The part that suppression or repression of emotions plays, I think that's probably maybe one of the tools or the discoveries you found along the way around emotions and emotions and how that links to trauma, suppression, repression, dysregulation. What have you found beyond the science that we know is out there? What have you found in your own practice and your own experience with the connection between that and mental health or addiction?
So I'm going to make a really big global statement here. I'll quickly define what suppression and repression are in a second, but the global statement I want to start off with is I believe that suppression, repression, very similar in concept. I'll talk about that in a second, is, in my opinion, the root cause of our stuckness. All of these unconscious habits, which often do involve us squashing, suppressing, repressing to the fact we're not even aware ourselves of what we're feeling, and then what we're doing in the world is, in my opinion, an action or our best attempt at self-regulation, addictions included, or any sort of, thing that we feel compelled, compulsive behavior. And it expands, into very, I think for some of us, validated, societally validated when we go down the path of work addiction, ways of being, again, that in my opinion are our attempts at self-regulation. So what does even repression, suppression means, and why am I kind of defining this as the root? The act of suppression is the experience of having an emotion, which is a sensation that happens in my body. Emotions are actually quite important. They are our interface between ourselves and this ever-changing, very complex environment around us, right? There are information on how am I experiencing this moment? Am I safe? Am I having a need? What do I need to do to navigate this and make sure that I'm keeping myself safe and keeping my needs met? So emotions happen inside of our body. So what suppression looks like is us registering an emotion, and say if in childhood, every time more consistently than not, when we felt sad, or maybe any emotion it was. For some of us, it's a particular emotion. For others, it's any emotional expression in our home. If we didn't have the safe space to say, hey, mom, dad, caregiver, whomever, I'm sad, and have someone to just hold space for our sadness, comfort us in our sadness, help us tolerate, right? Feeling sad. If we were maybe shamed, told not to be sad, told not to be dramatic, told that sadness is weakness, told many different messages, or maybe we just didn't have an adult available to be present to our sadness, what might begin to happen over time as I register sadness, as life makes me sad, as it will naturally do, I might suppress it, which means I might notice I'm feeling sad, but almost before I share with someone that I'm sad or show with someone that I'm sad, I have all of these reasons why to not show sadness. And again, oftentimes those reasons begin in childhood. Reality of it is the sadness doesn't go anywhere. All of the emotions. And again, what becomes more problematic is what we're doing now is we're trying not to express the sadness, and how are we trying to regulate ourselves, even though we're having this emotional experience. Repression is almost one level below suppression, to the extent that we don't even know we're feeling sad in that moment at all. And again, for very similar reasons in childhood, chances are we didn't have the space, and our protection meant at this point not to even allow ourselves to have that conscious moment of, I'm sad and I'm not going to show it. We don't even know we're sad. And for me, that very much described what I kind of devolved into, not having that supportive parent, right? I showed less and less to them what I was feeling, probably feeling it myself. And then over time, the stress of that overwhelming feeling without support resulted in me repressing it. I became, and people have described me as being very aloof. Nothing bothers Nicole. She's always just like, fine, right? In reality, I might have even agreed, because I was so disconnected from, similar to suppression, all of the feelings that we're having and we're not even allowing in our awareness are still there. Again, in my opinion, one of the root causes then for whatever behavior, dysfunctional habit or pattern it is, whether it's between us and how we're treating ourselves, maybe what we're ingesting and or within our relationship. So as far as I see it, that is the root. The more we become conscious of what we're not living in expression of what doesn't feel safe, of where we don't feel safe, we can begin to, I think, unpack some of what's driving us in those stuck patterns.
I think that we would agree with all of that, including the repression being at the basis of it. We really have seen that in our own work. So even though it's a global statement in your opinion, we agree and we see it in our own experience. Nicole, just a little bit sharing my own
Mm.
experience. The way I understand it for the audience, for me, is when I was bullied for being gay when I was little, I repressed anger. I didn't know I had it, but I did. I was like a caged animal. You back a caged animal into a corner, there's going to be aggression or anger, but I couldn't and didn't know that it was there. But then later on in life, I remember like being sad in front of people and suppressing it, like you're saying, like being aware that I'm feeling something. So I was going to ask you, this is the challenge that Dan and I find with the work is that, we often don't know we're repressing or suppressing because it's such, especially with repression, such an unconscious act. How do you work with people to get them first to understand that it's happening? And then how would you work with them to uncover these, I guess we could call them in some cases frozen emotion, if you want to speak to that? How do you help them uncover that once they do understand intellectually that that's happening?
Just referencing the slide that you popped up, and I also want to acknowledge how sometimes systems in our society also collude in very many ways to keep it right, to validate kind of this endless goings and doings and actually acts of suppression where we're celebrated if we have no needs and we're a robot continuing on and on. So I just want to kind of reflect that back. Now these spheres of influence, if you will, extend even beyond our immediate family and what happened there. Many of us are exposed to very societal pressures where we are, celebrated when we suppress any wants, needs, feelings, points of exhaustion, limits. And again, that becomes a valued and we are honored and are validated. So that I think becomes part of the story as well. So how do we know? You'll often hear me reference what I believe is the foundational building block of really any process of change, which is essentially, what most of us are wanting to do is to become conscious. So we can, to even just apply this really simplistically to this concept of emotions, to become conscious of the emotions that are so below our awareness or just underneath of our awareness and become conscious of why we don't feel safe enough to express them and giving ourselves then the gift of space to make a new choice. I will always break down a transformation, a change process based on those two steps. I have to become conscious of of what's happening, of why I'm stuck, of what's creating, right? My choice, my reaction, I should say. So once I become conscious and I'm now standing in this space, now I can begin to make new choices outside of those older reactions. So for many of us, that means beginning. And this is again why I evolved my practice to honor the body in which we're living, where all of those emotions, sensations, messengers reside. So becoming conscious in particular of our body is the first big step we can take of maybe setting that commitment. If you are someone who lives the large majority, if not all of your day in your mind, or maybe you're like me, you're so shut down because everything that has happened in your body is so overwhelming that the best way I've learned to describe it is I'm living on a spaceship. It's not that I'm necessarily even lost in thought, or it wasn't that in the past I was necessarily lost in thought. It was almost as if my mind was blank. I was somewhere else entirely. My body was going about the motions, maybe even having a conversation with your body, but psychologically, emotionally, I was somewhere else entirely. So what we can do is first, we want to discover how much time am I spending in this body where these emotions live. In our global membership, the Self Healer Circle, while it is a self-guided membership, simply meaning every month we put out a new course content, any new enrollment is offered and suggested to begin with. The first course we ever released in the circle, some 3 years ago now, as crazy as that is, which is called Awaken Consciousness. And the tool that I suggest that I want to offer to everyone here is something called a consciousness check-in. And we're going to talk about this in the terms of consciousness of our body. And what that might mean is because so many of us are just driven by our autopilot on that spaceship and we're not even aware of it. We want to set ourselves up by whether it's a Post-it note, whether it's a journaling practice where we set an intention, a promise to ourselves in the morning, or whether it's an alarm we set with that same promise that we put on the Post-it in our phone as a reminder for somewhere during the course of our day, we want to set the intention and keep the promise of checking in with our body. So I always say the phone because most of us walk around with it. It can alert us when the alarm goes off because we're probably going to be lost in whatever else it is that we do at that time of the day when the alarm goes off. And now we can do a conscious body check-in. And what that can look like is as simply as first, simply noticing that alarm went off. Where was your attention? Here's your check-in point. How conscious are you? How connected are you to your body? The answer will be yes if you say, yes, the alarm went off and I was like really immersed in I was feeling the chair I'm sitting in. I'm really present to the work I'm doing or the conversation I'm having, and I'm here. Chances are you'll be like most of us, and that alarm will go off. It probably will even surprise you. You might not know what the heck it's telling you, right? And then you go and you say it and, attention. No, I was like thinking about this argument that I had this morning. I'm worrying about this presentation that I'm not doing because I'm sitting here thinking about it instead of doing it, right? My attention is somewhere else. Now we have some data, right? We're not conscious in that moment. And chances are we probably weren't conscious the better part of our day. Now we can make a choice to be conscious to our body in particular. We can make two choices for hooking of our attention, right? Wherever else it was, we can now empower ourselves to do one of two things. You will be breathing in that moment, I assure you, because you will be alive. So we can use our breath as a hook, which simply means if my attention is somewhere else, let me just practice focusing, maybe just for the next 5 breaths, on how it feels to be in my body while it's breathing. Now I'm present back in my body to the sensations that might also be there. We can also equally use our sensations of the actual environment around us. If internally focusing on my breath doesn't feel like good enough of a hook, and in the beginning, it's hard to practice this, especially if what's in my body is uncomfortable, overwhelming stress. I might then want to use what's actually happening in the room around me. Am I sitting in a comfortable chair that I can direct, my hands to the texture of? Is the room cool? Is it hot? Are there bright lights? Maybe I have some aroma, like some scent I can tune into. I can use my senses. The more present I am in my body, the more then we can begin to make sense of over time, not overnight. It's not a light switch. If we've been repressing or suppressing, living in distraction or disconnection from our emotions, chances are we're not going to be able to tune immediately right away. The more, though, we practice those moments of let me just check in with my body. Let me just maybe start from the top of my head and see if there's any tension, see how I'm breathing, just see what's going on down here. The more consistently we're in our body, the more then we can open up our awareness and allow in everything that we've been pushing below the surface.
That brings up another question real quick before Dan puts up another graphic. We're going to switch on you to the topic of addiction, although it's all connected, as we know. But one thing I really like about you, many things, is that you'll share your own process, and you won't simply say, I've done all the work and I'm now perfect. And so you share, and I've had to share too, because I had anger repression as a teacher. I've had to share my process and help people understand I'm not an infallible human being and that there's stuff that I'm still processing or whatever. But maybe something that we all three here experience is people who say, well, why would I want to do that? These are emotions that I've been trying to not feel for my whole life. What is the benefit of doing this? And so maybe you can just speak to it. That
Absolutely. Completely understandable. There's a reason why I spent 30 years on my spaceship. Why would I want to? And that's, again, I think where sometimes as we begin to heal in this very conscious way, which really just means reconnecting what's always been going on and probably, again, is the root cause of whatever it is that I'm, struggling with in life. As I become more conscious of all of my story, then that's the fortunate byproduct gift of that is all of the pain, all of the wounding, all of the hurt, all of the anger, and the million other feelings that then chances are we aren't equipped to deal with, right? If I didn't have an attuned caregiver who allowed me to feel safe because they were simply next to me when I was feeling different degrees of stressful emotion and allowing their safety just to be that safe, secure container for me, then chances are I left my body for a reason. And when I now descend back down, not only am I left tuning into all of the pain that is lived in my body, I'm ill-equipped to handle it, right? And this is where and why it is so important to have support, to go slowly. As we become conscious, we really are opening up our awareness to deep, deep rooted pain. And that's when it becomes so easy to shift right into those old ways that I've been dealing with it. So why would you is because even if you're not looking at it, it is still there. It's driving your behaviors, and it's going to drive your behaviors at a time where you don't have control. And likely you're already living the byproducts of that day in and day out. So why we would want to do it. And again, this is what I was starting to say earlier, is a lot of times as we begin to heal, become more conscious, we feel like we're going backwards, right? We feel like we're not actually healing at all because I feel worse than I
Yes.
did, or maybe I'm more aware of how stuck and dysfunctional some of my habits are. And that might feel terrible. So
Mhm.
again, this is why I want to acknowledge that sometimes what does feel like, and we might label as a setback, is actually, forward progress, because now we're safe enough to show ourselves that we aren't that child who is ill-equipped anymore. Yes, we might need support and we should absolutely utilize it, but that is the greatest gift and teaching that we can give our adult self, is that relearning of that process that never happened in childhood, of learning how to tolerate little bit by little bit more and more of stress, and relying on more adaptive coping tools in those moments, so that in that moment we're not reverting back to that little child who's overwhelmed with no choice but to grab for that external thing, right? I can build that confidence, that resilience, and I can do it for myself. But we all have that part, that memory that lives in our mind and body. That's why it feels so overwhelming. When we disembark our spaceship and we're here for it all, there's that very much that tidal wave. That's that old childhood memory that says, I can't do this,
Mhm.
though we can, right? And with the adequate support, with the adequate tools, with the way to even learn how to soothe our nervous system, we can begin to believe what I'm just saying is words right now.
Well, just my experiences when I started to do that and sort of descend back down into the body, I remember thinking like, this is I promised myself I'd never go back into this, you know?
Mhm.
And that was part of the healing, which I was like, I remember telling Scott, because he was working with me about getting embodied, and I just started going, what are you getting me into here? Because there's some stuff down there that, it's been there for a long time and I don't want to dig
No.
back into, but it was driving so much suffering. It was driving addiction. It was driving repression. The repression itself actually for me had become part of the addiction. So it was just a lot of pain and rigidity.
I think that's a good segue, what Dan just said, because um, Dan's been very public about his work with addiction. We both have our own paths. And part of that is something interesting that that just said. I actually want to hear your take on this, Nicole, is what Dan said, that his repression of his sexual desire contributed to the compulsion of it. And I wonder what you think about that. Have you seen that before? I know there's some studies around it, like if you try to suppress intrusive thoughts, it makes it worse, anxiety or depression. Have you also seen it that in some cases that the repression of desire is actually making more compulsion or creating more compulsion?
Absolutely. I think anything we try to push and squash away only has that kind of reverberating opposite effect of kind of latching on, coming back stronger. So if we're pushing down, what a compulsion really is a desire, right? Whatever it might be for, it's an active desire. If we push down that want, that desire, that yearning, it doesn't necessarily go anywhere. And oftentimes we only have so many resources. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. To push down takes energetic, psychological, resources of ourself, of our system. And for me, the way that manifests is living on my spaceship so long. Yeah, it was cool. I was chilling, right? All the stress was down there, yet I was so consistently overstepping my limits that my body was screaming out, because I was so disconnected from that body that my body actually started to break down. I started to faint. I started to really become, kind of unwell. So same thing goes. We can push down desires, wants, needs all we want, but they still remain there. It's still living in our body. So, and we do see that a lot often too in the kind of OCD type spectrum. That's a lot of times where also compulsions come up, right? We can say and think it's this idea too. Even, you could offer yourself, don't think about a white elephant, and what probably that's the only thing that's going to be able to come to your mind right now. It's the same sort of really simplistic example, but right. Don't think about this. And unfortunately, so it's not about not thinking Similarly with compulsions, it's not about not having the desire. What we need to create space for is a new way to navigate that desire. Okay, the desire is here. I'm not going to shame myself. What might be driving it? What might be underneath of it? Is there a different related desire that this is actually about? And can I then make movement in that area? So it's not squashing. The desire isn't necessarily the issue. It's what do we do with the wanting, the yearning, the desire itself. And if we just keep using the resources to push it down, you're probably going to have, right, the fallout of it, because we only have a limited amount of resources.
Okay, the identity piece is a
Mm-hmm.
big thing that we brought this up for. And with the, I owned the 2 treatment centers in Palm Springs. Dan worked there, and we definitely saw how identity, not only around addiction but also mental health issues, can be helpful for some, but then it ends up for many, even if they don't know it, becoming part of the problem. Um, Not in every case. I don't want to overgeneralize, but certainly, like it plays into like, this is who I am, this is what I am, and it becomes your identity. And then that, for when our language, that also creates a sense that there's something deeply wrong with me. See, and then we feel like that's also a driver for addiction. So we're trying to speak in a way that says, let's question that identity. And I think you do too. In that quote, um, can you speak to that? How identity plays into this stuff?
I think outside of, I'm going to make another really vast statement about identity. I think outside of assuming the identity as a multidimensional evolving creature, any other identity that anyone would assume on this lifetime is really limiting. Because to put ourselves in any kind of box, as many of us do, even with pride, even, kind of acknowledging that this is morality and my values and what I want for myself, we are limiting some other aspect of ourselves that doesn't fit so neatly into that box. We are complex, we are nuanced creatures again. So unless that's the identity that we're celebrating of ourselves, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice, or possibly doing. So I think the value, let's start there. The value that I think many of us, receive from a label or identity of any sort of grouping together in this, kind of categorical way, on some level could very well be relief, language, a community, connection, understanding, tools, maybe even resources for ways to tolerate or deal with whatever the identity is. Maybe even people just to join together and band with, because we all think the same or believe strongly about this one thing together. So all incredibly important benefits that have maybe for a lot of us relieved shame, where maybe we did think something was wrong with us until we had the label, the name, the reason, the explanation. A lot of us, however, again, wear cloaks of our identities that have, again, been created out of experiences, circumstances, environments that we might not have participated in, identities that might not necessarily fit, that then can become, like I was sharing, more limiting. Because when we just define all of who we are based on one aspect, then automatically we're engaging in an act of suppression and repression for ourselves. Now we're not going to allow all those other aspects of who I really am, or the more fullness, I should say, of who I really am into that. And then another byproduct, I think I very much agree with you, is when we, kind of the identity becomes a constrictive feature in terms of this idea that I can't actually be different. I can't get better if we're talking about an illness or an identity around an illness in general. So we all, I think, have different relationships, and this is never, as I hope never anything I share is kind of a dictate. That's never, it's a suggestion. It's a suggestion to observe for yourself. What identities do you feel? What are most active in your life? And do you feel free in that identity? Or are there moments in time where that identity can be more limiting? And then you can kind of go forth, because like I said, there are many of us who feel relief, community, connection, and identity. And then there are a larger group with us as well that can feel that limitation.
Thank you. And I have another question here, but I want to preface it with one before that, which is, most of the people that watch that our audience know, even though we're in the spiritual community, we've been good about being trauma informed with this, but still it helps to define trauma. So everybody defines it a little bit different. How do you define it before we start talking about that a little bit more?
Yes, I can give a really simple definition. Trauma occurs when we have an overwhelming event and we are under supported. It is the imprint on our mind and our body. And I think that's a really big shift, because really traditionally in the field, and at least necessarily what I was taught, or a big part of the teaching, and I believe it is shifting, is that the label is applied to the event, with this idea that there needs to be a certain threshold, or there are certain categories of events that get this label as producing trauma. And really, I think a lot of people that are in the trauma-informed field now are kind of shifting that focus and really allowing for the reality that two different humans can experience an overwhelming event very much differently, depending on their level of support, on their environment, on what resources they have or don't have access to. For some of us, in terms of how our genetics are even wired, in terms of things that happen to past generations, because one of the things we know that is affected mainly intergenerationally is our ability to deal with stress, or in particular, what are we talking about? Our emotions in our bodies. So again, some of this is gifted to us throughout the generations, and in terms of, can impact then the way we relate in our own life.
How do we participate or play a role in our own suffering and then also in our own healing? That's an open-ended question, but where would you go with that?
Yeah. I want to, again, go big, which
Yeah.
is, first, I think we have to locate ourselves in our life. And what I mean when I say that is, for very understandable reasons, as I did for decades, when we live from that autopilot, which is a very reactive space, it's colored by fear, it's based in self-regulation and our just ability to, right, kind of do the best we can, ultimately with the tools that we have. Anytime that we are, trying to, self-regulate and self-manage. Can you repeat the question just one more time? I'm sorry, I lost my thought.
Yeah, well, the question is, how do you participate, or how do we participate
Oh,
or
the
play?
empowerment, right.
Yeah,
So I was getting a thing, and then another thought popped in.
yeah.
Anything. So how are we living life, right? And when we're living life from a disempowered, reactive, autopilot space, it's very understanding to not feel a participant in that life, to feel so dysregulated that I don't have those moments of control, right? Where things happen and it does feel like life is happening to me, because when I'm not conscious, when I'm completely, firing and trying to use all my resources to keep all of these feelings below the surface, I'm dysregulated, right? I can't be an active participant in my life. So the reason why I want to blow this kind of conversation more globally is so many of us feel disempowered. We feel like we can't affect change. So when we're having this conversation and applying it to illness or wellness or healing or whatever it is, if we don't feel like we're factoring into what's happening around us, then it's going to feel really hard when you hear me say that we can shift into that participation role, which means going back full circle in a very beautiful way, becoming conscious to the role and the choices that we're making, sometimes by not making choices, by allowing our autopilot to take over, by not showing up in service of ourselves, right? What role are we playing in life? Because we are always playing a role, even if it's like, well, I'm not really doing anything, I'm just kind of coasting through. Then our autopilot is going to translate into, we feel very reactive and we don't feel empowered to make the choices that I was describing earlier, come in that conscious space to create change. So applying this to the conversation of wellness or healing or sickness or whatever it might be, just means expanding that then to, all right, well, if I'm feeling unwell, what role am I playing in caring for my body and the symptoms that I'm having and the dysfunctional patterns that I'm living and maybe the way that I'm trying to coping? Where do I factor in? Because we are factoring in. We're playing some role that we can be conscious of. And oftentimes, again, it's something we've carried with us from our past.
One thing I really, really like also is that the self-healers paradigm that you're saying, like, we can take care of ourselves if we learn the skills and things, even if we need guidance like you or someone else. That's that you tell me, that's a break within the mental health field, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure that's always been there, but you've really emphasized it here. And I think that's revolutionary because we have to be empowered to help ourselves. So can you say something about that? How much of a break that is from?
100%. And the empowerment can and often does for many of us out there who have the access to the resources and the clinicians available in clinical rooms. Because what I mean simply is, when I say self-healing, that I do see get misinterpreted sometimes, it's not healing alone on an island. We are all by nature connected to individuals around us, and we need support on our journey. Self-healing really just factors us in, because there's so many of us that have, for many different reasons and messages, we defer, we go into treatment rooms, we stuff down and suppress our inner knowing, the life that we are the most intimate knowers of ourselves. We're with us day in and day out. We lived every experience, even if we're checked out, we've been here and a participant. And furthermore, even those of us that do have access to those contained treatment rooms, helpful support, there's a lot of minutes, hours, life that is lived outside of those rooms. So, and I would see this with my clients. We would even come up with great action plans to break the habits that don't serve us. And then it's really up to the client to go show up in real time and make these new choices, right? To show up and create new habits, to show up and break old patterns, to maybe just tune into our body and begin to explore what is going on. It's up to then the client, the person, the individual to do that. So self-healing doesn't mean healing in absence of support. It means factoring ourself in, our inner knowing, and the active participation that we will have to play to create change, because it can't happen in a vacuum. And for a lot of us, that is part of the journey, but it became really clear to me when I first created that account how global the community of individuals who are resonating with self-healing and this journey, is. And I really had to pull myself out of my little microcosm that is the United States and look at the levels of access to with other humans around the world globally. And the reality of it is, even for some of us here in the States, we don't have, professional support. Communities we're living in, are isolated. And that's even more the case for some people in other countries. Information is censored and limited. So again, increasing these conversations so that this access and these tools can be had, is also empowering the human if they don't have the resources to find that helping professional. That hope is not lost. That then, yes, support. We're not healing in absence of other humans. So we're playing an active role and also finding the safe humans, the safe relationships, which was a big inspiration for me. Even creating the hashtag was, again, a way to be visible, for people to start using that as a point of connection, knowing that relationships are the name of the game for us humans. And so many of us, are seeking desperately for those safe people who are speaking the same language.
And this comes from a quote where you said, not everyone wants to get better. And so how we've seen this in our work, we do somatic based inquiry where people do discover some of those old energies that they didn't want to feel. And then of course their resistance kicks in quite naturally. I saw it myself with repression of anger. I didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to express it. I didn't want to put it on anybody. But I was in a lot of physical pain. But I experienced the resistance to the work because my whole life had been built on not. And so I want to talk about, I don't want to confuse you with the compound question, but just can you speak generally about not everyone wants to get better, but then also this part of the question, which is we're in trauma bonds. And Dan and I kind of joke around that being a human is like a collective unconscious agreement to suffer. And so when you start to heal, get better, it's going to affect relationships with people who might not be ready to transform in that way. Can you talk about that? Not everybody wants to get better, and is that going to be a hindrance for people to get better when they're surrounded by people who are not up for that?
So this question, I think, really much also connects with this exploration, self-exploration, that I invite everyone listening to undergo for themselves around identity, right? With the reality being that if sickness, right, or lack of wellness, to the extent that we have to get better from something, if that is part of our identity, then we have a lot at believed risk, at least, right? Like if I'm no longer going to be the person suffering from whatever it is that I'm suffering from, whatever ailment, then who am I? Right. And that could, again, bring us back to, early childhood, overwhelming feelings where I've gained a sense of safety. And for some of us, we've gained a sense of connection built around those identities. We've learned to relate. And I saw this very much in my own family, lacking emotional depth, because again, we were all in crisis mode with overwhelming stress from either city life or, health crises happening in the home, that there wasn't able to be, because none of us were emotionally attuned or connected or safe individuals. We weren't able to be actually deeply or authentically emotionally connected to each other. So a lot of my relationship with my family members, my mom in particular, was around illness, identity. I would notice myself, calling my mom well into my 20s when I knew what type of allergy medicine I needed, just to, from the Dwayne Reed in New York City, from the aisle, telling my mom I'm sick and having that moment of connection around my sick symptoms. And I knew I needed Claritin for, I always take, you know what I mean? So for a lot of us, it's our identity, it's our relationship. So as I started to break patterns outside of even just connecting over illness, which was very much a big identity in my family, as we start to be different, to speak to the next part of your question, those dynamics and relationships around us are going to be impacted to some extent as we start to show up and maybe lose or shed parts of our identities and embody other aspects of our authentic self-expression, or maybe put up new limits or just interact differently. At minimum, what's going to happen for this other person is surprise, because we all feel surprised when an expectation is violated. If you're always and have always showed up in this one particular way, or you've had this type of relationship with this individual, and now lo and behold, one day you're not there, or you're not that way anymore. At minimum, and as humans, we don't like to be surprised. It's scary. We don't know what's going to happen next. We like knowing what's going to happen next. So at minimum, we're surprised. And of course, then depending on how we're changing the dynamic, now we have to go to what you were saying earlier, the mess of the other human and all of their past, right? That they might be reacting to in that moment, what they're filtering through, what they're hearing you say, or how they're experiencing. You might bring up their abandonment from their childhood. And so the cycle goes. So when I say trauma bond, what you're referencing earlier really is just honoring those dysfunctional habits that don't serve us, that we're all bringing from those earliest relationships. The way we once had to be becomes that familiar way that chances are we will continue to be in our relationships until we become conscious. And of course, we can create change and change dynamics in our relationships. There might be impact. There likely will be impact. Though we can begin to do that by first, like we were sharing, discovering how we're showing up and honoring that we probably are participating in some dynamics that aren't serving us. It's probably not all their fault. Like I once was so easy to throw the finger blame of, oh, it must be you. Let me just find the right person who doesn't activate this in me. And chances are, again, I was playing a role the entire time. So what trauma bond, again, really just means is honoring that we're so patterned, we're so habituated, we're bringing in parts of our past that might not be serving us. And the more conscious then we can become of which of those parts that we're bringing, again, whether it's wearing identities that aren't serving us. And as we're shifting, we can begin that shift and we can prepare ourselves for the impact that it might have and hold space, and also continue to honor the direction that we're going or taking the relationship in.
That's great. When I first started reading your stuff and following you on Instagram, I remember thinking, this is like finding out information that I never knew. You know, it's like when I went into Al-Anon and Adult Children of Alcoholics when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I played around in there, and they would say stuff and they would talk about family dynamics and they would shine the light on it. And I would go, oh man, if everybody knew this, that would be a crap show. You know what I mean? Just like this would be rough. And so I wanted to ask you, because I have followed you and I know that you've gotten flack because you shine the light on it and you say this stuff that's like, that shakes things up. And Scott and I have we've joked about it before, where it's like, we're going to upset a lot of people by talking about this stuff openly. We have, and we've gotten, there's people that get upset. And I just wonder how was that for you? How did you roll with that? And did you expect it? I'm sure you had partially to expect that it was going to happen, but how was that experience? Yeah.
I really, really appreciate this question because it really does embody so much of my own personal healing from expecting, dealing, navigating, being in it. And what I came to realize as I became conscious of myself and my habits and my patterns was ultimately how much I censored, modified. I didn't just share with people, whether it was just the thoughts, my perspective on whatever it was that was happening, or definitely dropping down a layer of vulnerability, my feelings, right? I was always censoring. I was always having this kind of subconscious tape that would imagine, right, playing a tape out of me being how I instinctively maybe want to be in this moment, and how might that affect you? And if I had any idea, right, it might cause you stress similar to the way I did in childhood. My family was already too stressed. I wasn't going to bring things that were going to make an already overwhelming situation overwhelming. So the habit is, and this translates into something very commonly known as people pleasing, is a version of it, right? Where I'm always filtering, I'm always showing up, and it's the most palpable version of me for how I imagine you need me to be. And as a result, that meant I watered things down. I didn't tell people my truths. I censored. And then I went into a field that validated I should do just that. So learning how to speak my truth online became, like I was sharing earlier, an exercise in learning how to say things that, are what is true for me, and then allow them to be said, and then allow what will naturally happen next, which is everyone will filter what I'm saying through their own subjectivity, through their own life experience, through what they imagined I said or what they imagined I meant. And then we can open ourselves up for misunderstanding. And that is a possibility and a reality of life that all of us humans need to navigate, negotiate. Of course, those of us humans who have Instagram accounts with many followers, right? We have many more opinions and filters to navigate. Though, again, sharing the personal side of things for me, standing in my truth has always been challenging. It's been something I have avoided doing. And now for me, it is a daily commitment I make to myself. And in the beginning, saying all this to say, I think if you probably go back, you'll see a shift over time in directness, with me probably increasing directness or not watering down things. Because in the beginning, there was still very much that filter. Don't say it like this. Don't go to that topic. Oh, say this in a different couchy way, or maybe don't talk about this at all, and over time, just living the reality and learning myself how to tolerate misunderstandings. Again, I'm not subhuman, right? It is very difficult. I know exactly where to look to hear and see very daily evidence of misunderstanding. And it isn't easy. And at times I torture myself. I go on, I look when I'm in a stress spiral. I don't look for the good. I look for, as many of us do, the bad. So it's not something, it is a daily negotiation and choice that I make. And again, a daily action in me teaching myself that it's safe to have my thoughts and my opinions, and knowing and living through the reality, again, that is the subjectivity of being yourself in a world where we're all going to be filtering what we're hearing. So it is my daily then commitment to finish answering the question more fully. It is something I navigate, I negotiate. It's an internal conversation that continues to be a focal point of commitment, meaning when I speak, and even now, like being able to be in just a pure flow state and time falling away and me not even realizing, kind of I'm just here right now because I'm not filtering. I have so many more of those moments as I challenge myself to speak my truth, regardless of the misunderstanding. Of course, this doesn't mean being insensitive. I tune in, if objectively the feedback I'm getting globally is something that I can take and integrate and look at, I do that, but I don't just automatically defer if I hear upset, because that's all I did my whole life.
Yep.
Wow, that mirrors my experience exactly. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
same, yeah. Well, you do it beautifully too. I mean, the balance that you do of sort of like just compassion and just the way it's said is so just, I really appreciate it. And it's really, honestly, I wanted to tell you this, it's informed the way that we've built the inquiries like over the last 2 or 3 years, because we've taken, I'll say, Scott, she posted this, or Scott said, then she posted this, and we'll kind of like work that into how we've built some of our organizations. So really grateful. Yeah.
Hearing just the integration of work. I mean, I think that's part of this too is, I speak so freely. I think it is when we come together in collaboration and we share our thoughts and we integrate ideas. I think this is, again, how we become a collaborative collective that's working together toward the shared goal of humanity. So, you will never hear me gatekeeping anything in any way. I mean, that's one of the reasons I love when we come together. I've learned from you guys, from everyone, and all the information that I've gathered, both reading, both learning, and both living. And again, I love this future. I think we're all living into a bit more, which is more universal collaboration, looking toward a shared goal. So I'm ever hopeful.
Yes, we are too. You mentioned something about being safe to share your thoughts and feelings and be authentically yourself. And so another part of the work that we're doing that I never talked about before were boundaries, because in spiritual, meditative, this is like a meditative or awareness-based practice where, well, I'll just say, is one of the things that you see is that in reality, there aren't any boundaries. It's all just really, that's an experience. But then that can confuse someone, because the need for boundaries in your personal relationship, especially if you have trauma in your background or repression, you might not even understand. And if you're in a spiritual search, for example, the need for boundaries, that's why we brought it in to talk about it, because there's this other piece of life that's not just about sitting in meditative awareness and open space where mom isn't there and sister's not there and my spouse is not there to upset me. Because when we go into relationship, well, I want you to answer it, actually. It's a big topic, but the importance of boundary setting, especially for those who've been traumatized and who are repressing emotion and who may find it difficult to do that. Yeah.
Boundaries. Again, a concept I knew nothing about. I don't think it was ever, I know it was not taught to me in my family. And I know that I can't remember anything even in my clinical training or program that even referenced it. It was something I came upon on my own journey as even a concept that was definitely not a lived experience. Because what a boundary is a limit, a point of separation, an area of space where I can remain intact as a separate individual that I am, separate from kind of in the room with me and the two of you in the rooms that you're in. So many of us have had blurred boundaries in our home space, no points of separation, have had to, for safety typical reasons, become less of a self, just like I've been describing all along, right? What I was describing is having no me, filtering me through the needs of everyone else. That really does illustrate there was really no safe container for Nicole and what she needed. And if there ever was a need that Nicole had in opposition to the world around her, chances are she showed up in service of the world around her. So I was overstepping in that point, in that moment, my own limit. And the reality for many of us, why it was a concept that I literally read about, we aren't necessarily modeled or taught these points of separation. And all of this goes back to, I mean, probably even hear me say the word separate might be surprising to hear what I'm going to say next, which is our ability to be a separate human allows us to connect with another human. What we're really looking for is the ideal state of connection between humans is interdependence, which really simply means I'm me, you're you, and we're connected together in relationship as a we or as a group, however that might be. That then implies that I've been able to remain me in that connection. I haven't had to lose, water down, adopt, modify, suppress, repress any aspects of myself because there's so much value in the things that make each of us different. I have natural gifts, talents, things that come easy that are mine and mine alone, and everyone else is going to look different. And if we're able to just truly be who we are and join together, right now, the group, the needs of the system get so much more expansive, varied, and we can embody what is who we are naturally. We don't have to adapt and modify. What most of us, though, were taught in the early systems where we weren't safe just to be who we are was that we actually have to shift, change, be someone different to fit in with the group. And in childhood, when our literal life is dependent on someone somewhere taking care of us in some way, we will squash our needs in service of that connection. So joining together, connecting, learning how to be us when we're in connections, all then means building those boundaries, creating that space, those limits for safe self-expression, defining where I end and you begin. I think that's an incredibly necessary journey, especially for safety. And for a lot of us, that might mean just kind of beginning to explore how the first prompt we can explore for ourselves is simply, how safe do I feel in my relationships, right? When this person calls me, when they ask, for me, for plans, when I'm out with this particular person, how do I feel? Right? Do I feel always nervous, on edge, constricted, literally scared? Is my heart tense? Or, in preparation to see them, when I'm with them and after, am I feeling, light, airy, connected, more positive in my body? Am I scared, or am I feeling more free and more at ease? And that might be the first kind of point of exploration, because if we're finding that we more consistently than not are feeling scared or aren't feeling safe, then we might be able to benefit from some limits or from some boundaries, which again are just points of separation, honoring that my needs are unique to me. My body is different. My emotions are different. I came from different experiences. I have different talents. So my needs need a different space, and I need to have space to meet my needs so that I can then show up as a whole individual and be me, and not just some version, not some identity, right? Not just some role or some mask, so that who you're actually connecting with, this is how I become a we, is me, is not a role, part of me, a suppressed, kind of, or the adequate enough aspect of my being that I was taught. It's all of me. You're actually in a relationship with me. And that only happens again when I have the safe space to be who I am.
Yeah, beautiful. Totally. I mean, for me, it's like, especially I've started to do this emotional repression work over the last year and a half that we've been developing. And I started to realize what boundaries were, I think, within the last 2 or 3 years. I actually become aware, because before it was like, I remember sitting again in an Al-Anon meeting, and they did the whole meeting on boundaries, and I couldn't hear anything that was said. I was like, I don't even understand, what language are they talking? Because I had similar experience to you, where it was like childhood was just
Yeah.
they're non-existent. Boundaries weren't even there, And so to go back and to become willing to like basically retrieve myself and get in touch with the buried emotions and go back and find out who I am. Then I can start to go, okay, here's now I can now naturally can set boundaries. It's not a thing like it that I have to force as much. Once I know who I am, they just sort of get set. So I really, yeah, I appreciate your message on that too. That's been really powerful. So yeah.
So, Nicole, I have one more. Well, I want to give you a chance to talk about your new book. This is a new book that's fairly new. I think I saw it on social media. How old is the book now?
So my first book, How to Do the Work, came out last year. My second book, it's a workbook called How to Meet Yourself. What you probably saw is I just got my first official package. I actually have the real live book. It's right behind me now. Essentially what it is, the seed of the idea of the workbook was planted really when I was writing the first book, How to Do the Work, which really is this comprehensive overview of holistic healing, of my journey into awareness, exploring a lot of the concepts that we talked today, and very much intentionally made that as practical as I could, with each chapter ending with a way to translate, right, this concept into actual daily action to create change. Though knowing as I was writing that book, marrying along, that I needed something much more comprehensive. I wanted to be able to offer the collective a roadmap of a journey of peeling back all the different layers and really truly meeting kind of all of the habits, again, that have peppered through this conversation that we've been having, that many of us are living day to day, identities, kind of ego stories that are coloring kind of who we think we are, to allow us to then, the self that I'm of course referring to, and even the title, How to Meet Yourself, is the authentic self, beginning to pull back all of the conditioning, all of the acts of repression, so that we can truly explore what is underneath. So I hope that this workbook offers anyone who does choose to embark on the journey of it a roadmap for, again, a journey of beginning to reconnect. And interestingly enough and intentionally, the journey begins with that physical body, kind of where our conversation even began, reconnecting with the body, so that we can begin to make sense of all these conversations even the three of us have been having around emotions and repressing and what's going on down there. So we start our journey in the body, reconnecting with the body, creating safety in particular in our nervous system, so that then I don't have to live on my spaceship. I can begin to see what's beneath everything, all of these habits that have been driving all of these patterned ways of being, so that ultimately I can pull back that final layer and create those moments of authentic self-expression. So it is published to the world. I cannot wait. I had the opportunity, like I said, because I have it now. It is so beautiful. The illustrations in it, I'm just so proud, and feel like it's just such a comprehensive tool. And I'm so excited for it to be living in the world.
Awesome. And Nicole, if people want to find you on social media, even though I think that'd be hard not to find you, where would they go to find you on social media and your website, just so they know?
At this point, I think I'm officially probably on every social media platform. So whatever platform is your platform of choice, where it all began, of course, for me was on Instagram at the.holistic.psychologist. Though if you search Holistic Psychologist on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, all the things, any way you consume content, we do have a presence on there. It's a year old now. I've been saying it's a new podcast, so I think I have to officially stop saying that now, because it's over a year old, called the Self Healer Soundboard. We release episodes every Sunday, so you can tune in on that. And then the website is theholisticspsychologist.com. So you can jump on the website. All the links for pre-order of both books are on there, as well as my email list, where you can get a free Be Future Self journal, a journaling prompt kit that I put together to help us on transformational journeys. So that is free if you sign up for the email list. And then, of course, all information for the Self Healer Circle, my global membership, is also on that website, theholisticspsychologist.com.
Okay, well, thank you, Nicole. We feel connected to you. We feel grateful. We feel appreciative. I don't want to speak for Dan, but I'm sure he feels this way. So thank you.
He does, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both. You guys are such a light in this world. And like I said, so close to my heart, coming through just different versions of thought on recovery. And you guys, you get it. I am just such a big support, and I'm honored to have connected and look forward to continuing to watch both of our evolutions on this grand journey of life.
Thank you for watching the Radical Recovery Summit 2023. To watch more of the interviews and the clips, and to share with your friends, please go to radicalrecoverysummit.com.